Today is April 6th, and it's Wednesday, and this is the Energy and Environment Committee. We are going to go ahead and begin. We have a quorum. Let's go ahead and take, unless there's any objection, colleagues, items 5 through 10 on consent.
Did I hear number 10?
Okay, we'll go ahead and hear number 10 as well. Now that we're going to take 1 through 4 and number 10, we're going to go ahead and operate under Rule 7 today. We're going to allow public speakers a total of 5 minutes in their addressing of this committee. That includes general public comment. So with that, Mr. Prieto, let's go ahead and take item number 1.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Item number 1. CAO report relative to the reprogramming of project savings within the Propo Bond Fund program. Provide additional appropriations. We have staff in the Bureau of Sanitation, Bureau of Engineering, and the CAO.
Very good. Well, let's have staff come on up. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. I'm Raul Mendoza with the Office of the CAO.
Good afternoon, Shram Kargani from LA Sanitation.
Good afternoon, Kendrick Okuda, Bureau of Engineering.
So we're here today. There's actually 2 reports. One report dated December 1st, 2015 from our office, and also an addendum that was issued April 4th, 2016. So what we tried to do in the addendum, for this reprogramming report was try to consolidate a lot of the recommendations in that addendum so we don't have to flip back and forth. What happens at Propo is, as we go through the projects and we finish projects, BOE will report and identify savings from the completion of those projects. And when we have that opportunity to do so, we come to the Citizens Oversight Advisory Committee, the Administrative Oversight Committee for Propo, and then the Council to potentially reprogram some of those savings for other projects, either projects that don't have enough funding or just other projects that are kind of in the queue. So I'll go through quickly over the savings and what we've proposed or recommended for reprogramming. So there were 4 projects that BOE delivered that were essentially came in under budget, and so represented savings of about $13.7 million across 4 projects. So taking a look at that and working with Bureau of Engineering and Bureau of Sanitation, we identified 2 projects. Aliso Creek, Lime Kiln Creek restoration. That project, the design money was already approved for $1.6 million prior to these savings being realized. And so the idea being that when additional funds were available, we would fund the rest of the construction with those savings. So that's one of the recommendations, is to approve an additional $9.3 million for the Aliso Creek project. The next project, the Machado Lake Phase 1 project, we're recommending an additional $4 million for the project, and that's for some fish and wildlife required monitoring activities. And then finally, in January of 2016, the AOC took additional actions to reprogram funds or recommend reprogramming of funds for optimization. So for a lot of these natural solution projects, it's a lot different from our typical capital projects where we do a building or something, where these natural solution projects take time to meet their equilibrium. So sanitation can probably go in more depth if you have questions about it. But basically, it's finding a way to make sure that what we intended these projects to do is that the projects are actually meeting those goals. And so for a lot of these projects, back in 2012, AOC and Council approved the concept of optimization and a certain amount of funding for several projects that were already completed. So sanitation and their consultants could analyze those projects and make sure they were meeting the goals that were initially intended. So as a result of that, we've come to a point where they've made some recommendations on structural improvements that should be made to those projects in order to make sure that the projects are meeting their initial goals. So those structural improvements are going to cost about $2.2 million, and so that's another piece that we're proposing for reprogramming. And then finally, there's several projects that were recently completed or are near completion, And so we're proposing to do some additional optimization activities or some new optimization activities on those projects that were recently completed. So overall, when you look at the savings and the recommendations that we're proposing for reprogramming, it leaves about $0.3 million in savings. And so we're recommending a revised program contingency of $17.2 million. So those are our recommendations with regards to reprogramming, but if you have any questions, myself or Bureau of Engineering and Sanitation can try to answer.
Mr. Koretz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So why is it that 2.5 years after the completion of some of these projects, we're still optimizing them rather than completing a few of the projects that haven't been funded yet, but are relatively small dollar projects?
Good afternoon again, Shahram Karagani, LA Sanitation Council Member. The optimization process started back in July of 2014. Even though the projects were completed, we had not started the optimization process until July of 2014 to have the consultant online. And what optimization does is basically, because remember that the green projects are mixture of air, water, and land and plants right now. To optimize this as far as density of plants, amount of water, it took us some time, but it is 2 to 5 years is normal based on complexity of project, and we are within that range. And we had experts throughout the nation that they came and testified before the two committees why each project is unique. Because when you create a building, you're basically done. When you create a green project, the entire life starts from that point forward. So, and that's what it took us some time to get the contract on, the consultant on, and just start having optimization on the projects.
So where are we on the other projects that are unfunded? I understand there are outside issues that need to be resolved before considering them for final funding. Do you know what those issues are and how we can address them?
What we have done, Councilmember, as savings of the projects become available, we have evaluated the projects, and those projects have numerical values as far as water quality, and as savings of the project become available, the two committees, COAC, the Citizen Oversight Committee, and Administrative Oversight Committee, they look at the projects and then they would recommend their decision to your council.
So I understand there were Prop O interest savings of something like $1.7 million since comparing the December and April reports. Are those funds also going into what you're talking about funding here today, or could those be available as matching funds for some of the other projects that haven't been done yet?
So I think potentially at this point, considering the level that I mentioned for program contingency, about 17 million, and compared with what BOE recommends as the minimum contingency, there are still some funds, including potential interest savings, that we could use for additional projects, or even some of the projects that have been presented in the past to COAC and AOC. I think right now, one of the recommendations in our report is for AOC and COAC to report back or through us to council on how we could further reprogram these savings for some of those projects that are in the queue. And because some of them do have outstanding issues, I think some, maybe it's just a matter of updating the estimates, but also just kind of weighing the different projects that are in the queue, looking back at the scoring and the ranking like Shahram mentioned, and then making sure that we're picking the highest ranked projects or recommending to the AOC and COAC the highest ranking projects.
And Councilmember, we are doing one more thing too. We are asking for all the projects in queue, LA Sanitation with collaboration, the Prop 84, Santa Monica Bay Commission. So every place that we know have grants that satisfy the same type of projects that we have, we are applying for them. So we are getting some good news on that part too from grant side. They have not been finalized, but I have heard interim good news that I could tell you right now.
Very good.
Mr. Farrell, any questions? No. Very good. Hearing and seeing no objection, we'll go ahead and move the item.
Thank you.
Approve the recommendations identified in the CAO's reprogramming addendum dated April 4th, 2016. That will be the order. That takes us to Mr. Spindler, if you disrupt the meeting, we're going to go ahead and ask you to leave. That'll be your first warning. All righty, let's go ahead and take items 2 and 3 together.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. TDP report in response to motion, Corretto, Farrell, Rue, Wesson, relative to measures to address excessive water use, and City Attorney, Water and Power Commissioners report and orders relative to proposed amendments to the Emergency Water Conservation Plan. F staff from DWP.
Good afternoon. Marty Adams from the Water System at LA Water and Power. Dave Pettyjohn, who heads up our Water Resources Group, and Penny Falcon, who's no longer going to be hiding behind me, who's largely responsible for delivering the great products we have for you today. So, come on, join us, Penny. She'll be the technical expert. Items 2 and 3. The first is in response to a council motion asking, the general question is, what are we going to do about the large water users in the city, and how do we deal with perceived gaps in the ordinance in the near term to deal with these excessive water users. And we did send a response back in the end of December. I would like to highlight just a couple of those near-term strategies that we took. The first was we did send out a second letter to the top 1% of our customers with much bigger results than we had with the first letter. We increased our patrolling, particularly in high water use neighborhoods. We initiated more water audits for residents who requested them. A lot of those were people who we'd notified with those letters. We did initiate smart metering on selected water services where we felt that we weren't getting a good view of what was happening, and we're looking for violation of the ordinance. And we did a lot of actual direct outreach to our highest customers. And then at the same time, we began work on item number 3, which was a change to the Water Conservation Ordinance, a proposal that we're bringing to you today to consider. And that was a change that primarily focuses on a way to regulate excessive water use by the highest water using customers that we have in our service territory. If there's any questions on the first report, maybe I could take those first before I get into the ordinance.
Mr. Koretz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, I was the most horrified to read in the LA Times that a number of top residential water abusers were in my district. At the same time, I have a lot of constituents who tell me they flush their toilets once a day and they shower with buckets and use the buckets to water their landscaping. And then you have people as extreme as using around 1 million gallons of water a month just to water their properties. So what's the general result been? Have we found that some of these folks were completely unaware of what they were using and have people pay their bills and have other people do their gardening, none of whom have really had this identified to them as an issue? And have we been able to work with them just to get their attention and get them to resolve that once they realized what was happening?
I would say that's largely exactly the case. One of the things that we've really learned in the last half year is that the communication with the customer and their understanding of their water use has really been lacking. And we are working to improve those ways to communicate. The 1% letter had quite remarkable results. I mean, the first thing we got was a lot of angry phone calls that people were called out for being a 1% water user. Most people were shocked to find out they're in the top 1%. And after the shock, the first thing we got is this request for help, and people wanted to know what they could do to save. I'm happy to report that as a result of the efforts that we've made and people just being notified about being in the top percent, the top 1% of our customers, their last year's water use was down 12.7% compared to 2013. It was down 15% compared to 2014. So in that high using category alone, there was substantial water savings that were had. We did have I have a few anecdotal examples of things that we uncovered. Some folks, when they found out they're the top users, they want to know what they could do. We have one customer that immediately looked for help replacing 4,300 square feet of turf. Someone's replacing a cooling tower on their property with zero water use equipment. Other people have found significant leaks on their property and reduced their water use by as much as half. We found things such as pools that were overflowing. and members in the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council were not necessarily in 1%, but they actually did a neighborhood challenge amongst themselves to reduce their water use by 20% within a 180-day period. So we actually got quite a response. We found a lot of the people that lived on an acre or less were in the top 1%, primarily because of leaks on the property, which also begs the question of what will we learn from smart metering in the future and how far will that take us. But it has had absolute results. And so the awareness alone has gone a long way for us.
So that's a significant reduction, but not as much as I would hope when you'd find that someone was using 1 million gallons of water a month. Once they realize it, you would think they could knock that down in half or 3/4 without, a great change in their lives. Have we been able to find cases where we've really had that kind of reduction?
I can tell you that, and the biggest customers, such as the 1 million gallon a month, number one customer, we, through the use of smart meters and direct outreach, we analyze their water use. We work directly with them. Their initial reaction, they were able to cut their water use by close to half. And they continue to make long-term improvements. Now, the hard part is that this all came about in October, and so we don't have but a couple billing periods of data. And it's during the winter time, albeit this has been a warm winter, so it's been kind of unseasonal. So we don't really have the whole picture of all the long-term effects of this, but we did see in cases like that some significant reductions. And actually, your question is a perfect segue into the second item: is what does the ordinance say for these excessive users? Where we're really looking for what that appropriate water use level is. But we have seen some results that are particularly large in certain instances.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Marty. A couple of questions. So the report for item 2 addresses single-family homes.
Yes.
Only. Have you thought about opportunities for multi-family housing and businesses as well? And maybe that'll be addressed in the ordinance.
But most of actually even the ordinance deals with the single-family issue, except for prohibited uses applies to everybody. There are difficulties with apartment buildings, and you may remember a report in the Times probably close to a year ago where there was claims that apartment folks weren't saving water, and we do know that we're seeing about a 10% reduction in multifamily water use. So people are saving. It's very difficult because we have certain instances we're working on where the management firm may be using too much water outside, but there's difficult to restrict that water use or do something punitive because it affects the people who live there who are maybe not party to that, or the fact that you may have people in the apartments that are using differing amounts of water and there's no good way to tell right now. And I'll let Penny talk a little bit more about some of the difficulty, but primarily the things that we're proposing here are focused on single family, which is about, it's the majority of the number of customers we have by far. Over 400,000 of our water services go to single family residences, even though they're about a third of our total water use. Penny, you want to comment on the multifamily issues?
Yes, and Marty did cover some of it, but we are having constant outreach with the multifamily customers. We work with the apartment associations. We get into their newsletters. We provide shower heads and aerators. We have some direct install programs that we work with, both for toilets and showers and aerators.
I've installed a few myself.
Excellent.
Just volunteering in my community walks, yeah.
Yeah, so we do have different programs that target the multifamily sector.
I know, in my district, we have over 80% renters, so we probably are the lopsided sort of percentages, the flip side for the rest of the city. So I just wanted to ask that. Also, I'm all on board for going after the water hogs, the excessive users, the water wasters. I just want to make sure in relation to small businesses, restaurants especially, that use a lot of water, that we don't have some unintended consequences as it relates to small businesses that use water, notwithstanding what is probably a fact that small businesses that use a lot of water could also conserve more. So that would be part of it. But I know our small business community is really, feels the squeeze of so many other issues. I'd want to make sure and pay very close attention to the consequences of increasing penalties as it relates to small businesses, car wash businesses, in relation to recycled water and the access to that and where all that is, and other high water use industries. So I'm just kind of giving you my feelings on this, but in any sort of ordinance revision or update, I'd want special care taken in that regard.
Well, and we agree with working with the customers. We try to educate the customers first. We do have a small business direct install program and rebates that focus on small businesses. But with regards to the ordinance and the implementation, and before any monetary fines occur, our water conservation response unit works with the customer, identifies what the problem is. With a lot of small businesses, it's how they're washing off their hardscape, especially with outdoor seating areas. And we have water brooms that we give away to them, or advise them on getting efficient high-pressure washers to do the job quicker and with less water.
Right, rather than just a garden hose that wastes a lot of water.
Exactly. And so what we typically find with all our customers, once we educate them, they never fall into the monetary fine. If they do find their way into one monetary fine, they usually never repeat. So the problem is usually fixed. So we try and work with them first.
One thing with most businesses is because they're working on a thin profit margin, most of the time they're not looking to waste water. So we don't find that there's a lot of disregard for water in the business community because it's costing them money. So.
Thank you.
Great. All right. No additional comments or questions. Let's go ahead and take speaker cards. Wayne and Antonia. This is item number 2. And as you're walking up, I made the announcement that we're operating under Rule 7, so you'll have a total of 5 minutes for public comment today, in total including general public comment. So why don't we go, staff, we're done with you. We'll have public comment come up now.
Come back for number 3 then?
Yeah, we'll come up to number 3. And since we're hearing 2 and 3 together, we'll go ahead and afford the general public comment 2 minutes on this item against the total 5 that you have today.
All right. Lady first.
Well, thank you very much. What a gentleman.
And please go ahead and speak on item 2 and 3 because 3 is up next.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm not an expert on water, but we know that it is a precious commodity, especially now with all the water restraints that we're having in this time and age. My concerns are water conservation. How exactly are we going to conserve water, and how much water can we conserve when we're having an increase in population? How does the city, or how does the county, or how does the water department manage that on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis, at the growth of the population? How do they reconcile that? That's my question. And will it get worse in the next 3 years? Where will we be in the next 3 years if we haven't had a drastic earthquake? And why can't we, now I have a question, why can't we get water from the beach? Why can't we funnel the water from the beach? I mean, listen, I'm not an expert, but why can't we just bring in water from Santa Monica, Venice, and funnel it into the city? If we can also treat sewage water, which is what I heard that they're doing now, and we're drinking it, how wouldn't it be better to treat salt water from the beach rather than sewage water? I don't get it. And again, I'm not an expert. And the thing that I have a problem with, and again, this is all these agenda items, is I hate carrying water bottles. We are living in the greatest country in the world with the most brilliant brains in the world. Why do we have to carry water from the store home back and forth? Or when you're homeless, you carry those dang things all around you. Can't we find a portable water purifier that is not fraudulently made or will backfire in the next few years or go bankrupt in the next 2 years? Isn't there something, a portable water purifier that I can just carry with me anywhere and everywhere, and that will last me 3 years or 4 years? Can we not? Do we have something? Does NASA have something like that? I mean, it is tiring to carry that stuff all around you. So That's my concerns. We are in the greatest country of the world. God bless America and Donald Trump. Come on. Help me here. Thank you.
Yes, Sheila Kuehl and the county board made a motion to limit development unless the developer can prove where they're getting the water resources from. That's the good news. The bad news, they deferred it for a year. So Sheila Kuehl understands the need to stop this out-of-control development in fucking Hollywood and these places like all those areas.
This will be your second warning. We're speaking to item number 2 on the agenda. It's measures to prevent excessive water use.
And how do you do that? You stop overdevelopment. If you would listen, you got to stop. And we're taking item 2 and 3 together, correct?
That's correct. And so item number 3 is the Emergency Water Conservation Ordinance with amendments.
Yeah, so how do you stop it? You have to stop these developments. You're over-densifying without the proper water resources. That's what Sheila said. Another thing that happened, the DWP board, and if Mr. Pickle had the guts, he'd come up here and tell you that LAUSD is flushing water down the goddamn drain on all of the water outlets and the water fountains in every school. They're turning them on every day and wasting the water and running it down the drain. Or Jill Banks-Barad wants to bucket that water and use it, and it's been a year, and the LAUSD, that's the largest water customer for DWP, tells her to fuck off. They will not start reusing that water. That was in yesterday's DWP board meeting, and I'm surprised that your pickle man does not come up here and tell you this important fact that after 1 year, LAUSD wastes the most water of any water user in LA City. It is not the wealthy clients in CD5. It is the LAUSD, the worst water abuser in LA County history.
Okay, colleagues, hearing and seeing no additional comments on item number 2, let's go ahead and hold that on the table, and we'll have number 3 come up.
Thank you very much. So if I could continue with Councilman Koretz's segue into how do we deal with the with the large water users. As part of the response we provided on item 2, it projected that we were going to bring back amendments to the city's water conservation ordinance, specifically targeting how we would deal with the large water using customers and how we get compliance. And so what we've are ready here to present today is changes to the ordinance that were approved a couple weeks ago by the Water and Power Board, and then if you see fit to go on to City Council for approval to become actual city ordinance. We have 2 particular changes to the existing water conservation ordinance, and as just a brief reminder, so we're in phase 2 of the ordinance right now, and phase 2 of the ordinance provides for 3-day-a-week watering. There's prohibited uses in the ordinance that are prohibited under every phase, such as washing down hardscapes, watering during the wrong time of day, washing your car with your parkway sprinklers by accident, things like that, serving water without request in a restaurant. Those are always prohibited uses, and I expect that those may become prohibited uses in the whole state of California permanently. The last time we were before you, a few months ago, we actually added a new phase 3, which is to give us a 2-day-week provision. We have not had to go to that at this point because we've been achieving the city's goals and the state's goals in terms of water savings. But the question becomes participation by everyone and how do we deal with these large users. And so what we have before you is a new ordinance amendment, and it's to look at what we call the unreasonable use of water. And when we developed this, we looked at a couple different aspects. East Bay Mud has an ordinance in place that provides for unreasonable use of water, and they have a certain billing unit cutoff by which they declare it to be unreasonable use, and it's independent of property size or what's going on that property. We looked at a similar situation for us, but we determined that it would be too limiting because if we set a bar so high that we didn't want to imply that every water use below that was reasonable. And we also didn't want to ignore the fact that we have some very large properties in the city and some smaller properties, all of which may potentially be unreasonably using water. So what we have proposed is a two-step approach to deal with excessive water users. The first step takes advantage of our new Tier 4 rate, which, as was defined here, is called our excessive water use rate. And Tier 4 is a rate that we hope to not sell any water in. And that's the rate that's going to escalate in time to be increasingly more expensive and represent the cost of replacing water and finding new sources of water. But if customers are chronically in the Tier 4 rate, so they're a chronic Tier 4 water user, which at this point could be up to about 9% of our customers, although a lot of those fall into Tier 4 maybe a couple months in the summertime, so it'll be a smaller subset of that. But if you're in a Tier 4 customer and you're a chronic Tier 4 customer, then you would get to be part of a special club. And that club then qualifies you to be a potential excessive water user. And so the second step of that would be for us to then look at your individual situation and to do an audit of your water use. And with the goal of that being developing a personalized water budget based on your property needs. And the way that would work is that we will start, the board is going to follow up with direction to start at the highest users and to work our way down. But there are some very large properties, and large properties may have some, we don't know exactly what the proper amount of water that they would need is. And so we would look to do an audit consistent with all the latest state standards, Department of Water Resources, interior water use guidelines per capita. There's state model landscape ordinance guidelines, and we would always use the latest and greatest state-approved technology to come up with an individualized water budget for each property. The water budget could include things like mandatory repair of leaks and other fixtures, but once a water budget is established, that would then become the definition of whether that customer is an excessive user or not. If someone is found to be an excessive user and they don't bring their usage down, then we have a new penalty schedule proposed. Currently, and this is the penalty schedule, so currently in phase 1, where there's no watering restrictions other than prohibited uses, which would be flat out waste of water, washing down hardscapes, there's not a penalty for being a high water user. Starting in phase 2, where we are right now, if someone is a chronic Tier 4 customer and after we do an audit on that property, they violate what's given to them as their personalized water budget, the current fine would be $1,000 a month. And that fine would go on for the first period of time, first half a year, while they have a chance to make corrections. If corrections aren't made, then they would escalate as time goes on. So the idea is to get people's attention and change behavior. And if behavior continues, then to make those fines escalate. The bottom right number is, of course, the very largest number. And this is to represent as the water phases change and water becomes more scarce, then the savings are more important. So as the phases go, that people are no longer allowed to water as much outdoors. In phase 5, there is no outdoor watering. So in phase 5, if you're a Tier 4 customer, you're buying water, it's phase 5, you have the only green lawn in Los Angeles, you have all the money in the world to spend on water, and 2 years later, you just want to do what you want to do, then your fine is $40,000 a month. So that is a steep fine. Even at the current fine of $1,000 a month, it's about a 10 to 15% premium on what we're viewing as the highest water customers' bills. We do believe that what this does is it gives us an objective way to apply criteria to customers, not just as sheer cutoff, but customers based on their actual situation, based on how many people live, in what type of, in what size residence, on what size property. A lot of properties that we have in the largest customers are very large, but they're also not all landscaped. Some are very large, they include hillsides and ravines, and so we'd say, what is the water budget for what you actually have? And then what we're also proposing through our board direction is that there's a certain minimum, so below a certain level, then we'll do a desktop audit to clear people so we can cover more people more quickly, and also to a certain top, and that we're not really believing that you should have a perfectly watered rainforest in Los Angeles. There's some limit that above that point, it doesn't matter if you're watering correctly, it's just excessive. And so, but this would be the penalty schedule, and it'd be the two-step process. First, you're a chronic excessive water user, and then secondly, you have an individualized water budget. The other component is that if we don't get cooperation or don't get on the property, then we're going to enforce based on what we see on the bill. And so we're going to, make sure that we can get on. We have learned that as we get on people's property and interact with them, we get results. And we want to do that because the goal is not to be punitive. The goal is to correct behavior and to help people save water, take advantage of the rebate programs we have, and let us help you out as a customer. But if someone doesn't care, or they don't live in Los Angeles and they're staff waters and they want to, and water is still not an expensive commodity, if it's not worth it to them to make the change, then we're going to collect additional monies. Any monies that we've collected in the past and in the future under the Water Conservation Ordinance stay in the Water Conservation Program. So they help us to police the program. They go into rebates and other things so that we can help afford more money for customers who do want to save water and help make those rebates go further. The other part, just a small kind of course correction we have, is on the existing penalty schedule. Currently, the penalties in the blue line, that's for every phase of the ordinance. We have the same penalties for violating the ordinance. We've proposed to escalate those penalties as the phases go up, so it's more reflective of the value of water. So if water is more scarce, the penalties are more severe. I can tell you in the last year and a half, we've had about a little over 1,000 Tier 1 fines. We actually have some people who've paid $300 fines. We have 4 of those. They may be the candidates for the first time. We go to the next step, and the next step is a flow restrictor. And so we've not had to go to that point yet, but we have 4 people that would be the next measure that we take. And so we were proposing that we would escalate these so that if water is more scarce, and we're not sure what's going to happen this summer, there's a lot of water, a lot in quotes, on the Western Sierra. The Eastern Sierra is a little below 2/3 of normal, better than last year, but not great. Southern California, LA has very little rain compared to what we thought. The groundwater basins are all suffering. So there's a decent amount of water in one spot that everyone's going to rely on. And so if we have to take measures that water becomes more scarce this summer, we want to make sure that the enforcement tools reflect that correctly.
Marty, I've got a question for you along those lines. You help me understand how you came up with these penalty amounts, and it's clear to me that you have to do it through the Water Conservation Ordinance. Mm-hmm. But how do those numbers comply with Prop 218 or 26? And maybe that's a question for the City Attorney's Office, but help me understand, how other jurisdictions have done the same thing, and is it legal for us to do that?
Okay, I'll if Dave Edwards needs to chime in, I'll let him, but our understanding is that what's allowed under Prop 218, so different than setting the water rate. Dave, can you go back to this slide? Different than setting the water rate. We did look at the option of, could you make a higher tier for a higher use of water?
And the report is crystal clear on why we can't do it
right.
that way. My question is, how can we do it under the Water Conservation?
So in the Prop 218 judgment, it did clarify that you can establish penalties. And so penalties are allowed outside of the cost of water. And now no one's defined what penalties are reasonable or unreasonable. In this case, we tried to establish a set of penalties that we thought were significant enough for people who have very large budgets to spend on very large amounts of water to affect behavior. So for instance, like the current highest water customer, we believe the water bill is probably $90,000 a year. Now, there'll be some behavior change probably because of the new tier structure, which goes into place April 15th. Their water bill, we project, could go to $120,000, $130,000 a year just because they're such a high tier 4 customer. But if you tag on this kind of penalty on top, if they're actually prove out to be an excessive user because they're using more water than their personal circumstance requires, then that would be about another 10% premium on top of that as a starting point to change behavior. So
in item 2, your report says that we have to make an assessment as to what their behavior would be sort of in bounds on the water consumption. So, and you mentioned that tall fences and access is difficult. So do we have to make that determination on what sort of their maximum allocation is in order to figure out what a penalty could or couldn't be first before we assess the penalty? I mean, how does that, because there's a distinction between what folks pay for under 218 and a penalty. How do you make the distinction so that we don't lose?
Do you want to?
Sure.
David, this is David from City Attorney's Office.
Yeah. You already have an excessive use rate in the new rate structure. So when the customer falls into Tier 4 for a certain number of months and then is contacted by the department, they get a plan. The water budget is only a part of that plan, and the water use that is deemed over and above what's reasonable for that particular property is noted as unreasonable and wasteful. So under the Constitution, it's already illegal for a person to make an unreasonable or wasteful use of the water.
But it's not illegal for somebody to be in Tier 4.
Right.
4.
Correct.
So how do you, I guess what I'm asking is, how do you sort of make the determination, let's say I want to spend $125,000 a month under the new Tier 4. I can stay there, but when do I get over sort of that tier and now I'm in the penalty phase? How do we make that determination?
When the department then contacts that person, analyzes the use of water, and makes a determination that that is not just excessive, which there's a rate for, but is wasteful and unreasonable. And the violation comes not from a use of a particular amount of water, but for a violation of the plan that's put together. So it could be the water budgeting, but it could also be other parts of the plan.
Okay, but that's going to be a discretionary based on the department sort of making the assessment. So if somebody wants to live in Tier 4 land, they can.
Right.
It's just when they become wasteful that they can't. And you make the determination on wasteful after you've done the assessment, which means that you're going to have to get in there and.
That's correct. And actually, so, because our rates, we look by lot size and temperature zone, and after a certain lot size, it doesn't keep going larger. So we do have properties that are multiple acres, and so those folks will be in Tier 4 all the time. That doesn't mean they're using too much water necessarily. So when we do this audit, and there are prescribed, there's prescribed ways to do this. And one of the reasons that we didn't put those in the ordinance is that as the state comes up with new prescribed methods, or there's new prescribed numbers for appropriate, per person indoor water use, we want to always be able to let our board quickly direct us to use the most current technology. So we will, but there are landscape ordinances will follow, say, for turf, what is the proper amount of water? For this, what is the proper amount of water? For that, what's the proper amount of water? We'll look at how much they have of everything and say, this is the amount that you should be using based on that. And that would then, so anything above that would become, as Dave describes, as a unreasonable or wasteful use of water. But it is a two-step process. So we're trying not to draw an arbitrary line. We're trying to draw a line that is fair to the customer, but at the same time, doesn't say the sky's the limit, that if you don't use water properly as defined by the different methods of the state of California, then there will be a consequence.
Got it. I asked because ostensibly these folks have means to file suits against the department, and we've got to make sure, anticipate that sort of action in the future.
Yeah.
Mr. Koretz, any additional questions?
No, I don't think so.
Mr. O'Farrell and Mr. Blumenfield? Yeah. Mr. Blumenfield.
So where does the fine, is the money go anywhere particular?
So all the money goes back in a conservation program and doesn't go to general budget. So and even currently it does that, but we're making sure it's underscored in the ordinance that all penalty money, anything that we collect from administering this ordinance goes back into helping us administer it, helping pay for rebate programs. Ultimately, the best justice would be that if someone uses as much as they want and they pay a fine for it, it goes back to help pay rebates for people who want to save water. And so it does stay all within the loop of water conservation.
Great. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You may have covered this already. I went on with one of your water conservation units, and David helped connect me to that. It was great seeing what's going on there, very proactive, positive. Are we going to be increasing the number of staff who do that kind of work, or how is that going to?
We're going to add a couple more people to that staff because they do also do the audits. We did look at what the workload of audits is and how much they can accomplish now. We do believe we'll get through the highest, one of the users that have kind of been in the press. We'll get through those easily this summer, realizing that, so we'll just have a rate change April 15th. We'll have to have a round of bills come out. So by the time bills come out and we analyze the highest users, it'll be summertime before we have someone who is a qualifying Tier 4 customer. And then we'll work our way down. We're going to take advantage of the desktop audit so we can use all of our technical staff in-house to either clear people because they're clearly, based on their land size, way below any kind of problem, or we may have some people that are way above any kind of forgiveness because it's so excessive. And so we will do some desktop audits to clear as much as possible. The other thing that I failed to mention that is in here is that currently we have to witness a violation. It's almost like if you're in the freeway and someone's speeding, you can't call the CHP and ask them to give a ticket. So right now we have to see a violation. So we're increasing our ability to look by use of technology, which means smart meters and other technology, so that if we suspect something's going on or there's a large property we can't see in, we may, as we have done currently, install smart meters in locations where we think is warranted, and it doesn't take but a couple of days to see exactly what's going on. And so we were able to, the highest water user we installed on their services, and in 3 or 4 days we knew exactly what their watering patterns were. We contacted them and we immediately got changes. But we'll have the information on our side, and we will act on that information for enforcement.
Mr. Koretz.
So I'm not sure I entirely understand that piece. It seems like you should be able to identify an overwater user just by the numbers. So obviously you were able to help them reduce their usage by identifying what the problems were. But I would assume you could penalize them without that, because you know if they're spending enough to use 1 million gallons of water a month, they're obviously overusing. I don't know that you actually need to see them overusing to realize that they are overusing.
Right. And see, and that was exactly the problem with the largest customers. They had a very large property, actually larger than what we've even first understood on the books. And so, and we didn't have a penalty for just amount of water. And so we were able to see their watering patterns, and our first method is always to consult and correct, which they did. But until we have something such as this that we're proposing, we didn't have something just strictly for using too much water, based on what their needs were. And so they weren't. So
you're saying you can't do it based on just numbers, you actually have to physically see.
Well, we will be able to based on numbers with this program, but we didn't have that provision before this change to the ordinance.
And did you run into many people that just said, it's my right to use as much water as I want and I'm going to, or were virtually everybody just not aware of what was going on their property?
Mostly not aware. We had some people that weren't very happy about being called out as a top water user, but no one said that they should get to be a top water user. And so there was, and usually after the shock, most people want to know how to change. I mean, across the board, I don't think we had a single instance where people said, I'm going to buy what I want to buy no matter what. People wanted to do what they could do, and we've seen great response as you see by the numbers. And so we have not run into resistance, but we know we have large properties. There were some cited by Steve Lopez in the Times being built by people who won't even live here. And how do we get those people's attention? How do we get people to care who even some of our top customers don't live here on a regular basis and have large staffs that handle their properties. And so the challenge is how do you get a hold of those people? How do you force compliance? And so we try to put those tools in there that says we have 30 days to get on the property and fix the problem. And if you don't fix the problem or you're not interested in fixing the problem, then we have a cure for that as well.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, colleagues, we'll go ahead and public comment was satisfied on items 2 and 3 since we took them together. We'll note and file the report on item number 2 in as much as it's submitted for informational purposes only. And with item number 3, we'll approve the proposed amendments to the city's emergency water conservation plan ordinance as specified. That will be the order. Mr. Blumenfield, I thought I took items on consent. Mr. Prieto, I don't think I took a vote on items 5 through 9.
You did not.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and take items 5 through 9. Now, we do have speaker cards on it, so I'll call Wayne up for items 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9.
For total?
A total of 3 minutes, and that will satisfy Rules 7. Thank you, Madam Clerk. That'll satisfy all total 5 minutes allowed to each of the speakers. So what's before you, Mr. Spindler, is items 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9.
Yes.
For 3 minutes.
Yes, our good friends.
I'm sorry, Mr. Spindler, you started them at 5.
Our good friends at the Southern California Gas Assholes. At Sempra, this was on Drudge, which was related to an article in the Times, claims there's going to be blackouts, that there's not enough gas to run all the generators at the LADWP in the upcoming summer. So all you have to do is go to drudge.com, link in the LA Times, and the article was written by the Times. I didn't hear anybody mention it today at City Council. That's a hell of a story. Rolling blackouts coming. Yet, we have other people that say it's total bullshit, that it's just a panic button. And this relates to the Aliso Canyon gas leak and the fact that the LA DWP may not have enough gas resources to run the generators. So which is the truth? Is the truth that it's a goddamn scare tactic and this is just Sempra trying to get you guys to let them fill the gas up there and gas more Jews in Porter Ranch? Or are they crying wolf? Which is it? And why wasn't the city council handling that in a special motion on the floor Tuesday right away? Because you don't know what's going on. See, that's the problem. You're talking about the Hyperion digester gas. We're talking about the entire shelf of the southwest United States. So I'd like to know what it is with you guys in Sempra Energy. How many of you do they own? All 15? How many of you have they bought and paid for? Because I just don't understand how you can have a company that causes the worst natural gas leak disaster in the United States history, and yet they're telling you they're going to have to pump more gas up there in Porter Ranch or turn your electricity off in the fucking summer. I don't believe this. That's economic terrorism if that's not true, if they're floating that out as a rumor. But it just goes to show you, if you've got enough money in this city, you can buy anybody. And you can make them say anything as long as you're paying them off. And that's exactly what you got, all these items. You're talking about the water wasters and all of this crap about reducing water usage while you build in Hollywood and Highland and all those areas, and you just keep building and building and building and over-densifying on 110-year-old water pipe systems that are just collapsing under their own weight. And then you're building on earthquake faults. When we do have an earthquake, this place is done for, and you know it. But some of us will be okay, because some of us own our own water wells. So we're going to be fine on our own water wells when we go up 60 miles from here and laugh at you dumb assholes when 7 million people can't even flush the toilet after taking a shit.
Colleagues, that takes us to item number 4. Mr. Prieto?
Surely, item number 4. DWP report relative to an update on the home water report pilot study program and related matters.
Mr. Adams.
Thank you very much. Item number 4, we sent a report out on number 4 where we were. This has to do with the Water Smart audit program. And actually, when the report was sent, it was just a kind of a status report. But we actually have results to report for the first time here today. We finished the initial targeted pilot. That was 20,000 customers that were randomly selected throughout the city. And these customers received what's called a home water use report. And it gave them information, feedback on their water use, how they compared to comparable neighbors in home size and location, and gave them an idea about how to save water. Where this report's been used in the past at other cities, they've had very good results as far as water savings go. We just recently got the results from the first pilot of the 20,000, and we actually had a 4.6% savings when compared to a control group. And so this was a group of customers who only actually had a chance to get 6 reports during the pilot, associated because of our bi-monthly billing. And so that was actually on top of the existing conservation in the city, a really fantastic result. So we were pleasantly surprised to have a 4.6% result, seemingly just from the customer interaction. We do have an expanded pilot going on right now. We have 73,000 customers throughout the city and also focusing in the high water use areas. So that is ongoing at this time. But the indication from this is that this communication with the customer and the use of the home water audit is effective. It alone achieving, getting close to 5% additional savings in conservation just by providing the messaging and the outreach. So you're the first ones to hear that news today.
So how do we scale it up then? Because I mean, 5% is something, right?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a challenge. When we started this program, there was only one provider out there that was really doing this work. There are now several providers that are playing in this space, and so we will have to go to an RFP and go through a process to go citywide. But we are working on that. We would like to go citywide with the effort. This and the things actually we talked about earlier with the 1% high water user letters and the things we're doing is really underscoring the fact that people just don't get how much water they use. And if you don't give them some benchmark or some comparison, they don't have any information to go by. And so this information alone over a course of 6 reports resulted in 4.6% savings on top of everything else we're doing. So we are working to go citywide, but like I say, we will be a little more protracted contracting process because there's more vendors that are playing in this area now and they want to compete with each other.
So let me ask you sort of about the process. So is it anticipated that the board will take an action soon to to instruct you all to put together the RFP?
We are actually working on that our own without needing a board action to do that. So we are.
So this sort of plays into another area that I'm interested in these days. So that's a significant program in a large contract. So you can initiate that RFP without getting board direction?
We would initiate this as part of our overall water conservation plan. We've identified this as one of the components in the water conservation plan and budgeted for this kind of work as part of our outreach efforts.
And so that brings me to the point that I think I'm trying to make here. So if it's part of our water conservation efforts and we're mandated to do that, couldn't we just select a vendor, save some time, and get going on, or multiple vendors? Because by the time the RFP process comes and goes and contested applications and then the transmittal from the board to this Energy and Environment Committee, ostensibly the full City Council, we won't be out of the drought, I guess, is the good news. That's really bad news, actually. But, I mean, we lose. We're getting into the summer here, Marty, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but Jiminy Christmas, can we move?
It's a long process. What you're suggesting has crossed my mind, that we may be able to do multiple pilots with multiple vendors and compare products. So there may be another way to skin this cat that we'll be looking at.
Maybe not pilots. I mean, they're outright water conservation efforts, and we're mandated by the state as much through the Regional Water Quality Board. So it seems to me that we should just. I mean, who's going to sue us on that?
We will look at all the vendors, and if I can find a way to bring them on board without going through as big a process, but I might need to consider them as pilots to decide what we select for the long-term product based on either what gets the best results or what's received best by the public. Maybe it'd be a living RFP where the proof is in the pudding, but we'll look at some way to get something done faster.
Or a rolling process. I mean, because you started this in your presentation, so how much water deliveries do we expect this water year that begins April 1st? From the Los Angeles aqueduct system?
So the results we just got a couple days ago tell us that although we've been reporting Mammoth snowpack as near normal, that's got to be the only place near normal for us. Most of our snowpack is in the high 40% to the low 60%. So we are expecting overall from the LA aqueduct, we have about 63% snowpack. If we look at commitments in the Owens Valley, and also the fact that it's been dry, a lot of that water is going to soak in the ground. We will probably have far less than 50% delivery to the city. So last
year we took how much?
Last year was the lowest year on record. We took about 30 or 32,000 acre feet, which was actually 10% of what we took 5 years ago.
So my point is that water is ostensibly the tier one, the cheapest, best water for our ratepayers because it's our system, our property, our water rights, and we're nowhere near where we need to be in collection of, or rather dispatching of that water. We won't be, looks like, for another year or two, probably more. So, I mean, I think that we've got all of the ammunition if we get contested. My point is that it's going to get hotter this summer than it did the year before. That's what the trend has been. I'll stop. Colleagues, questions?
So if I can answer, we'll try to leverage that and see what we can do to bring someone on board. And to your point, if we don't save, we're going to end up buying more water from MWD. A couple years ago when we had close to 80% of our water coming from MWD, at that point, 40 cents on every dollar we collected, we sent to MWD to pay for water. So that's 40% of everyone's water bill not going into pipeline infrastructure, not going to make it in the system better, just going to pay someone else for water. So we want to avoid doing that. And so that alone is a reason to continue the conservation. Since we don't have our own local resource, we need to really drive that conservation message home. We will absolutely look at what you're suggesting and see a way to move this as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and colleagues, before we go on to questions, we'll have Dr. Pickle sort of opine on this. But I guess my point is we need to really underscore the fact that, we have two systems. Well, we've got more than two systems, but sort of the larger systems in our supply is the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which belongs to the people of Los Angeles, and then the other system, which gets really expensive. And in the news, it's reported that there's snowpack and Oroville looks good, and some of the other major catchments in Northern California seem to be on the mend, but that just means higher prices for us.
That's correct.
And the on the Eastern Sierras is sort of the best, the first in the loading order of our water dispatch, and it's still not good there. So we're far from out of the woods. Is my point, colleagues. Dr. Pickle?
On the procurement issue, there have been a number of emergency declarations. Can the emergency declarations, I believe at the state level, help you with procurement? As I read the procurement level rules, it has to be an emergency declaration at the city level. But if nothing else, this helps build some of the components of reform we've suggested for a special procurement process if things are dire and urgent. And I believe in the reform discussion, the phrase exigent circumstances has been used as something similar to dire and urgent that might accelerate things. So one, maybe the emergency declarations can help you now. As an alternative, this is another item where reform on procurement processes might help.
This is very helpful. Colleagues, questions? Mr. Blumenfield?
Well, it's a great program. I encourage what you're saying about trying to do this quicker. Just a quick random thing, on the water score, the example you have, the person is obviously spending a lot more water than the average person. Do you have the reverse effect if you have somebody, presumably you have an equal number of people who are spending less than the average? Is there any
I'm not aware of any rebound because I think people are proud to be very low and they're keeping their bills down. There's no rebound issues that we've ever seen. It's more of a kind of private mail to you drought shaming that you should know about. So.
But it's presented in the same manner, or is it?
It's a happy face.
It's a happy face.
No, you don't get the sad face.
No, you get the
happy face if you're below the average, and congratulations, keep up the good work, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yes.
I've seen similar programs in the power area where you're ranked as a percentile billing period by billing period versus your neighbor. So it turns into a beat your neighbor
competition
game.
Yeah. Peer pressure. Yeah. And again, the important thing is that you don't necessarily know how you're doing if someone doesn't tell you. And so this gives you comparable results and tell you whether you're doing good or bad. And as we see from the pilot, it's as effective as what we expected, maybe even better.
Mr. Koretz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, there's already kind of a friendly competition. Is there a way we can gamify this even more and maybe generate more of that? I don't know if we've tried to get neighborhood councils to compete with each other or neighborhoods, or if there's a way to recognize the highest water savers in some way.
We have talked about how to do that. I've actually been approached by certain neighborhood councils to do a council with the council competition. They happen to be one of the higher using councils. I caution them that maybe they should do something different first. But there is some interest in doing that. And I'm hoping that this actually the program that the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council is doing might take off and be a good example. And actually, there's a press conference and some news studies at one of the homes that was involved with this last week. And so, starting internally, but I think there is some interest in council versus council. I don't know if we have the data to digest this by zip code and such. So there may be some other ways to slice and dice the information. This is very new to us, just getting these results. So we might be able to leverage this as well ourselves without releasing personal information, but making use of it on a broader scale for that purpose.
And also, since we're doing well in this regard and we have a new impending problem with electricity shortage during the summer, is there any chance that we could look at doing something similar to, for electricity conservation while we're looking at blackouts? We obviously need to dramatically cut back our usage.
We haven't talked to the power system about this, but I know where I live, I get both a water and a power one because one's happy and one's frowning. So the water's happy. But so they do both. And so we'll talk to the power system about that possibility because there's an opportunity. We have the database with customers. There's a chance to leverage that as well.
And we're starting to do well on, and we've done well on the water side. So obviously now that this is more urgent, there's no reason that our two sides shouldn't be talking to each other and using the good practices from one to.
And the way it works, you would get two different reports. They look very similar, but one would be water and one would be power. Yeah.
Very good.
Mr. O'Farrell. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Chair Fuentes and Vice Chair Blumenfield, thanks for your leadership on calling for this report. It's terrific, and I'm a huge believer in peer pressure. Especially if it's put to good use for such a great cause. It's terrific. A few questions I have is that it's a pilot project, and so I would imagine that if I'm not in the pilot project, I'd want to opt in somehow. Is that going to be an option?
The goal of being the pilot was to find out if it got the result. So that's what we piloted to see if it was worth it to do this. At 4.6% for the control group, it looks like it's worth it. Right. So that's why we'll now leverage it to become something, and we'll provide it where anybody really wants to opt in or not. It'll just become something that we look to provide across the board. So that's our goal. But it was only really a pilot to make sure that it was worth the investment. If it had gotten us 1% or 2%, because one of the things that we found is in places where they've done this, they've gotten this range up to maybe 15%, but the city's got such a history of water conservation, we weren't sure how much more there was to be had. Right. So that was why we didn't know if it was really worth it if we were going to get that result. So, but with this tells us that it's a good program for us.
It has the feel of something that will be really popular, I think. And so what's the cost associated with that? Is it just a matter of printing something additional on existing,
It's actually a company. So Penny, do you have the?
Yeah, it's.
Oh, go ahead and you're the expert.
All right. Well, you need to bring it back to me then. I need my cheat sheet. So the expanded pilot, which is going now to an additional 50,000 customers, or about 53,000. So we're getting about 73,000 customers now. The expanded pilot is coming in cheaper than the initial 1 year, 20,000 customer pilot. So our original pilot cost about $7.26 per customer. The expanded is at $5.95 per customer. So we've got an 18% savings by ramping it up. And we are looking to find out some different things from this expanded pilot. We're looking at some different outreach and to see how focused outreach in some areas, how it translates to additional water savings. So some of the messaging, custom messaging, will be changing on the panels there, and then seeing if we get increased or decreased results. So.
But we hope.
That cost per household, is that for a year or?
That's per customer for the entire pilot.
For the entire pilot, okay.
Right.
Which is how long?
Or actually it's for each bill or contact that they get, right? And so what we try to do to make it cheaper, we have 50% of our customers that get the paper reports and 50% that get electronic reports. And we try and encourage people to sign up electronically because the more we do that, the less expensive it's going to be for us. And so they just get emails or they can get it on their smartphones.
But it is an investment, so that's why I first want to make sure it's worth it.
Right.
And then as we expand, that we can drive that cost down.
And I just wish.
So I do have another number for you, though. If we expanded this to all our customer base, which is about 480,000 customers, it would cost us about $3 million a year for this. So that probably gives you a better sense of the price.
And the pilot was about $1 million.
Right. The pilot's $1 million. Okay. It just, I don't know the answer to this at all, but even renters want to get in the game of conservation. Mm-hmm. There's just not the infrastructure, it looks like, to allow them into the game because of the way multi-unit buildings are.
The way they're plumbed and the way the communication goes with the water usage.
Et cetera. Right. I just wish we could figure that out because I think that's a real opportunity. I don't know what the answer would be. We can't individually meter all apartments, wave a wand and make that happen. I know that, but I wish there was a way we could encourage creatively for multifamily dwelling owners to somehow participate in some way. I just think that would be such an opportunity.
No, we agree, and we are keeping our eyes out for innovative technology that's going to help with communication for those apartment dwellers, so.
Yeah, even the apartment building information, if we can't even share, well, first of all, the tenants probably have an electrical account, but the water use is the private information of the building owner. So what they do in terms of sharing that is out of our control. So it's an issue that we are constantly working to try to find ways to tackle. Hopefully there'll be some innovative ways to sub-meter buildings without replumbing. There's some look at the kind of attach-on meters that are very small that work acoustically and may provide some opportunities for sub-metering within a building. But at least the bright side is that we do see savings amongst folks in apartments. It may not be as much as in homes, and they don't really have all the drivers because they may not be responsible for landscape and things like that. But we are seeing response. But I totally agree. The more we can get to them, the better off we are.
Yeah, I just hate to underestimate or undervalue the conscientiousness of people who happen to rent.
Yeah.
They're going to want to be in on the game somehow, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's
as a former renter myself, I just want to put that out there.
It's about a third of our water use.
Yeah, that's significant.
Yes.
But the building owners, we've reached out to them, and they are pretty responsive. We've got programs for the homeowner and the building owner, and to retrofit their building with low flush toilets and free shower heads and things like that. So we've been pretty successful penetrating the multifamily market with those programs.
One thing we're seeing that's interesting is besides the the turf removal and the stuff that's getting all the news, there's been a real resurgence in home plumbing device fixture changeouts. The front-loading washers have gone crazy, and now there's some new versions of toilets beyond the low flush or the ultra-low flush, and there's some super high-efficiency flush, and we're getting a lot more people taking advantage of those rebates. So there's still more inside that's being done, even though we think we're pretty well saturated. That continues to just move pretty quickly right now, besides the outdoor water savings. So that hopefully would also translate into savings inside multifamily dwellings.
Terrific. Well, thank you.
All right, we'll go ahead and, let's see here. Note and file the report in as much as it was informational. Item number 10, Mr. Prieto.
CAO report relative to the request from Bureau of Sanitation for authority to execute personal services contract with USA Waste of California and Waste Management on related matters. Bureau of Sanitation representatives.
Very good. Mr. Prieto, I was reminded by Mr. Blumenfield again that we didn't take a vote on the consent items. We did hear public comment, so we'll go ahead and, seeing no objection to items 4 through 9, they will be taken, 5 through 9, they will be taken on consent. Not on consent, they'll have been deemed approved because we had public testimony. Very good. That brings us to item number 10. Mr. Koretz, you had some questions?
Actually, I just had one modest question, which is there's been a big movement, especially recently, to use green waste to help create healthy soil, which does some good things in terms of greenhouse gases, et cetera. So what are we actually using the green waste for? What have we done in the past, and what are our plans in the future for maximum use of it?
Hi, good morning, Councilman. This is Rowena Romano with Support Services Division of Solid Resources. Currently, how we operate within the city, we collect around 1,800 tons per day of the green waste from the green bin. 80% of that is contracted out to private contractors, and then 20% of that we deal with in-house. So 20% of that goes to Lopez Canyon and our harbor mulching facility, and they are either mulched or composted. We have 11 giveaway sites for mulch around the cities in which that's given away. And then our contracted material is either chipped and grind at the facility, and then they send it out to farmers within LA County. And they're used for soil amendments, composting, etc. So they are recycled, sir.
So good use is made of it, because I know at one point it was just a top layer at landfills, but Presumably, none of that is going on. We have better uses for all of it.
Yes, sir. We had in our RFP, we noted that we will not be using any of these yard trimmings for alternative daily cover, which is like the top cover at landfills. So our contractor is aware of that.
Very good.
All righty. Colleagues, what's before us is the department's asking for authority to execute a personal services contract with USA Waste of California and doing business as Waste Management. So if there's no objection, let's go ahead and authorize the Board of Public Works on behalf of the Bureau of Sanitation to execute the identified personal services contract with USA Waste of California, Inc., doing business as Waste Management, subject to the approval by the city attorney as to form. Very good. That shall pass. That passes. Colleagues, that brings us to general public comment. There's one speaker card. Antonia Ramirez. Ms. Ramirez? Going once, going twice. City Attorney, Ms. Ramirez isn't here. Is it okay if we adjourn?
If she is not present, then you may.
Very good, colleagues. That brings us to our adjournment. Thank you.
Thank you.